go ahead and share my screen. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Everybody can see that okay? Beautiful. So let's see. So picture this. It's a rainy day and you're walking through downtown New Brunswick, which is right next to the Raritan River in central northern New Jersey, depending on where you're from and what you believe, if central Jersey exists. Um, and you're walking down, you're walking in front of this supermarket, and there's this storm drain right in front of you. And you listen down deep into the storm drain, and you hear this trickle. And as you listen closely, you realize this trickle is more of a rushing. There's a lot of water going through the storm drain. And as you peer down, you see that there is indeed quite a bit of water flowing through that storm drain. Now, you might be surprised, but this water is no normal storm drain. It is the remnants of a historical stream that has been buried after centuries of development in the New Brunswick area, uh, paved over and channelized the stream underneath what became roads, buildings, supermarkets. And my project is about daylighting some of those streams, showing the public that these streams do exist, and also hopefully helping to inform public policy in the future and future design based on where these streams exist. So today I'll share some stories from the history of the Lower Raritan Watershed and the streams therein. The pages of those stories are dozens of historical maps, and the characters in that story are a bunch of streams, and the arcs of those individual characters are the natural and cultural changes that reshape these streams over the years. And this has formed the basis of my project, Finding Historic Streams of the Lower Raritan Watershed. So my vessel that I use, historical maps, these are the only lenses through which stream change at this spatial and temporal scale can be viewed. This is a map of New Brunswick from 1876. And as you can see, there's a pretty big canal that runs along the Raritan River. New Brunswick, it used to be a very important port city. Believe it or not, it's hard to believe that some cities this far up rivers were port cities, but there was a lot of commerce that happened in New Brunswick, a lot of industry here. So a lot of ships were being towed by or towed down the canal on this little path. But today, this same place, that canal is now buried underneath Route 18 and a large park called Boyd Park. There is still a little bit of the canal remaining here, but for the most part, the canal has been developed over. And in 2021, the floodwaters of Hurricane Ida laughed at this and said, I was here first. I'm going to show you who I am, and I'm going to go where I want to go. So as you can see, even our finest engineering can't always change where water naturally wants to go. And this question of how, where, when, and why this happens throughout the watershed builds the framework for my research. So a lot of times these changes rear their heads when a severe event happens, but those historical streams and those patterns always exist. So I aim to use historical maps as a tool to sleuth out where those are, because these historical maps are a record of where these streams used to be over time. This is my study area. It's the Lower Raritan Watershed, and it is the largest fully contained watershed within the state of New Jersey. Now, you might be wondering, what is this concept of a watershed? The best analogy that I can think of is actually today. I always laugh when it's weird that I laugh when I see this, but I walk down the sidewalk and I see like a spilled cup of iced coffee, and the water is just like sent velocity. You can see it's just like the water spilled everywhere. Ice cubes are melting. Somebody probably had to go back and buy another iced coffee to get through their day. Depending on where you are in the state in relationship to hills and valleys, that water, that coffee, is going to drain to a certain waterway. And if that coffee drains into the Raritan River, you just so happen to be in the Raritan River watershed. If I were to take my bottle of water here and dump it on the ground, that water would eventually flow into the Raritan River and into the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm technically in both the Raritan River watershed and the Atlantic Ocean watershed. You can have a lake shed too. For pretty much any body of water, you can have this shed concept where this is all about where the water goes. So before I set out on my project, I set some intentions. The first of which is that I want to learn from historical maps. These are snapshots of the watershed at different points in time. And I've always been a fan of maps, so I thought that this would be great. I actually learned about this project through one of my classes. One of my professors, Dr. David Tulloch, introduced me to this project and welcomed me on and invited me to take part in it. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. These maps they're really cool to look at because they're portals to the past. They show us spatial information that we might be familiar with, like roads, things that haven't changed in a long time. And they put that right alongside things that may have changed, like zoning or land use. And in this way, we can learn a lot. They put the past into context. And we view streets and cities that we know in a time period that we don't know. So we can learn about geography as a whole from looking at historical maps. I also want to be able to create messaging about my work that anyone can understand. I like being able to give these talks because it helps me to practice communicating science to a variety of audiences. Because the more we know about our land and about science, the more we can make well-informed decisions in design and policy. When we connect those two disciplines, we can have crosstalk that can only be beneficial. And so I want to bring watershed history to the public by way of some public communication. I'm grateful that the Mappen Student Research Scholarship has provided me some funding that can help create some of these public-facing materials. And my vision is this kind of it's kind of a placard that can be installed at a location in the watershed and tell a little story about a historical stream that has been modified or used to be here. And I'm pleased to share that I'm making this a reality at Lake Papiani in Edison. This is right near the headwaters of Ambrose Brook, and I'll share a little bit more of that later. But back to that also sharing public information concept. This is the acronym that I learned from one of my mentors, Heather Fennick, who's here today. Thank you, Heather. I live by this acronym when I deal with data, and I encourage others to live by it too, because it really promotes wise use of data and use of data in any concepts. And it just doesn't have to be scientific data. It really helps us be stewards of data. An acronym is FAIR. It stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is a word, a lot of spaghetti word alphabet soup here, but basically we want our data to be findable. For instance, I want my stream data to have an explanatory name. I needed to explain what the data is in the file name. And it needs to be able to be retrieved through a search engine or a search term that is relevant, like watershed or streams. I want my stream data to be accessible. And for instance, I should place my stream data in a database where people and web scrapers can actually find it. So not buried deep in a bunch of different drop downs and hyperlinks. I want it to be front and center and able to easily accessible. Interoperable, it's a little bit of a tricky concept, but basically this is think of it as transferable. So the data files that I use, the types of data that I use should be transferable from one type of software to another. So if you've ever opened up an Excel file and it says, oh, this was made in Excel 2003 or something like that, it's no big deal because Microsoft has ways of bridging that and bridging that time difference and allowing you to open the file. But with some other files, it doesn't really work that way. So making sure that everything is transferable is important. Reusable, the R in FAIR, this usually stands for licensing. Sometimes when you're dealing with data, there are some licenses that prevent transfer and reuse of the data for different reasons. My work deals a little bit less with licensing, but more about how I can pass this data set on to people who might build on it in the future. So I am offering up this data set to a class at Rutgers, and before I did that, I made some detailed documentation about what the data is, so that these students can reuse it and use it for their own purposes. So that's the FAIR data acronym, and that's what I live by when I produce my data. So back to the big picture here, the project. These are all of the dark blue lines are all of the streams in the Raritan Basin in the present day. And all of these blue lines are all of the streams from historical maps that I've cataloged into my data set. And these additional stream segments here are streams that my predecessor on the project, Colin Marks, has digitized before. So the goal is to create a comprehensive, FAIR data set that spans the entire watershed. And that's what we've set out to do here. Now, last purpose is that I want to better understand how natural and cultural history connect. So these are two topics that are rarely presented together. Kind of as, I mean, before I started my presentation, we were talking about New Jersey studies and the different kinds of things we learned about New Jersey, and we learned a lot about some cultural history of New Jersey and perhaps some natural history of New Jersey with geographic areas, but we never really learned about how they're put together or where they overlap. And industrialization might come up in history textbooks, but what about the streams that were right next to that industrialization? So, for instance, how did this building of this industrial complex impact the adjacent Cranberry Brook that used to run along here? So I actually took a site visit here, and I found some agricultural equipment too. So when and why did the land use shift from agricultural to industrial? It turns out that historical maps can tell us that. So aside from anthropogenic changes to the watershed, you can also have natural changes. Channel evolution is a term that we use to call the change of stream shape over time for natural causes. So this pattern of meandering, this little weaving in and out, can happen when the water in the stream moves in a way that deposits material on one side, dumps some sediment on one side, and chips away at the sediment on the other side. So what the result is this weaving in and out. The stream kind of meanders more and more over time. It goes swishy, swishy, like a snail, or not a snail, a snake, like a snake. And we can explore the historical maps for evidence of this type of stream change too. So those are my intentions. And so now on to I want to get into my methodology, what I did, my methods of analysis here. You might be wondering how I created this map that compares a historical stream to a present day stream. I created this from this historical map of Monroe Township. So I used a protocol that transformed these historical maps into accessible and usable stream data. And I used it with a process that is called GIS, which is, it stands for Geographic Information Systems, or Geospatial Information System, depending on who you ask. And my professor, David Tullett, can correct me at the end of this if I'm wrong with that. So GIS allows us to take spatial data and do a number of analyses on it. So my first step is to acquire some data. First, I hit the libraries, but it's actually the digital libraries. I comb through a number of different databases on the internet. I use the Rutgers libraries, Clements Library from University of Michigan. USGS has a lot of maps. Harvard Library has a lot of maps. David Rumsey Map Collection and a number of more have a lot of historical maps. And I use some search terms like map and specific town, and I might find something like this from Monroe. So this is it comes out as an image file, and I do some scanning of the map. I ask some questions, and I record some data. Where did it come from? Where was it stored? Where did I get it? Are there streams or are there roads? Are either of them labeled? Because that's important too. I need to know what this actually is that I'm looking at. Any other valuable info like insight into the land use or local industries, some other small minutia about the map, any other valuable info. And this is useful for more questions that I'll ask later, so I'll want to record it. And I do so by recording it in a spreadsheet. I create an entry with the date that I accessed it, and all of this is important for creating a fair data set. I want people to know what I did just from looking at the data set, how they can find it too. I put my search terms in here too. So as a whole, this is what my whole data sheet looks like for the New Jersey Historic Maps Portal database. And I have an entry for all of the maps that I've cataloged there. So now that I have this particular map cataloged, it's time to make it comparable to the present day stream data. And the way that I can do that is with a software called ArcGIS. Now, this concept is a little bit tricky to understand, but if you think about it, we can paint a mental picture of the place that this map represents if we have a good impression of, let's say, Monroe Township or Middlesex County. And I didn't, before I started this project, have a great spatial awareness of upstate New Jersey. I'm from South Jersey, so I didn't have a great spatial awareness of what it's like up here. Now we can use Google Maps to search for Monroe, and we get a digital map of Monroe, and it looks like a little, you can navigate, and it takes you where you want based on your search term. But wouldn't it be nice if we could search for Monroe and get this historical map? Now, in order for a system or a software to be able to do that, this map needs to be associated with spatial information, or it needs to be associated with a place. And the way that a place is stored is in a coordinate reference system. Like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's a coordinate reference system. So if you think about the lines on a globe, you can have an equivalent to that on a computer system, and you can have points on a picture linked to that, and then you can project or display this picture on that coordinate system, and you can display other data in that coordinate system too. So the way that I do that in ArcGIS is a process called georeferencing. I'm referencing this map to a geographic or a coordinate system. So this is about lining up the visual data to the coordinate data. I select some points on the raw map that I don't think have changed in the time that between the map and now. And believe it or not, road intersections is a great way to do this. Roads haven't changed in a long time, whether they were dirt back then or where they were gravel or paved, or now they're paved, but they tend to be in the same location. So I chose two intersections that looked pretty prominent. And then I went to a data set that already has coordinates associated to it. So the system already knows where this is. If I searched for the name of this street, I could be directed to see this street right here. And I find those intersections that I saw on the historical map, and I click on them too on this map. I need 2 points here to get it right. And voila, the software, it flips around the map, it maybe stretches it a little bit, orients it the direction it should go, and it plops it down right on the watershed. So the map was always there to see, but now I have a copy that future researchers and me in the future can visualize in an Earth-based coordinate system. And this may come in handy if anybody wants to do anything different with this data. Now, for me, I have a template where I can trace the streams off of this map and store them in the same coordinate system. So it's a win-win. The process of tracing a stream into the coordinate system is called digitizing. So I'm not really a color inside the lines kind of guy, but that skill came in handy here. The way you do this is you go into the tool and you click along the stream. You basically draw a stream segment, and the result is a piece of spatial data. Now, this piece of spatial data also has some attribute data. This is some text data that is attributed to the spatial data. It's attributed to the line. So this entry in the attribute table tells us what the stream is, what map it came from, the year it was estimated, and the creator, me, GW, and my confidence that the stream is actually that the map was accurate with where the stream was. I also I have this entire data table for the whole stream set, and this is a part of a massive data set that Colin and I have compiled. And the whole data set is 2,350 stream segments big. So that's a lot. So this is our attempt to create fair data that hopefully is as fair as we could make it. So the next step is where things get pretty interesting. We have the streams from the historical maps, and now it's time to see how they differ from the present day streams. So we use a data set called the National Hydrography data set that includes the shapes of all streams in the present day in New Jersey. And ArcGIS, the same software that let us kind of modify the map and trace the streams, it lets us view these data directly alongside each other. So I put them up, I put them in the same map. I get the green line here is my map from the Cranberry Brook and Tributaries map of Monroe, and these blue lines are from the National Hydrography data set. Now I can see right off the bat, there's a couple of differences here, but this one stood out to me the most. It looks like the present day stream is abnormally straight, and it seems to track right alongside this railroad that did exist in 1876, but the stream looked like it had kind of made its own way around the railroad track. So I can further enhance the analysis by looking at the stream data over an aerial photograph. So I get an aerial photograph, I put it on in the software, and through this lens, I can interpret the landscape and get some insight into what may have caused this stream to change over time. What's there today that wasn't there in 1876 that may have caused this stream to change. So this piece of land, you can see it's situated east of I-95 now, and there seems to be a lot of development going on here. You have some housing, a farm, some industrial complex. It's the whole shebang in terms of land use here. We can see how the present day streams, the blue streams, they fit into this present day landscape, but this historical stream, it doesn't really fit. It's, you know, it goes right where this industrial park is. So I can build a hypothesis here that, okay, well, perhaps if this industrial complex is here today, then perhaps this industrial complex caused this stream to move, or the development caused it to move. So I went to Monroe and I did a little bit of what we call ground truthing, or a site visit to kind of test our data or test what we see on the software, because things might be different on the ground. So I did a little bit of bushwhacking, and I came upon this really straight stream that looked just like it was on the map. It looked like somebody had taken an excavator and dug a big trench to funnel some water. And I pictured the industrial developer in a hard hat saying, okay, well, this is where the stormwater is going to go. It's not going to go where we want to build our warehouse. It's going to go this way now. So, you know, put it over here next to the railroad tracks. I also found some pipes and some other things that indicated that the water was trying to be pushed away from where the industrial complex is and towards the railroad tracks. So I also stumbled across some farm equipment, and this kind of thickens the plot a little bit. And if you look back to the aerial photograph, you see that there is a farm nearby. So I thought, well, maybe that farm used to be a lot bigger. Maybe it was the farmer that modified the stream first, and then the industrial developer came along and said, all right, I'm going to build an industrial complex where this farm is. And we know that, we can say that over time, a lot of farmers have sold off their land to industrial development. My dad always tells me that, you know, farmers, they may not have a retirement plan, but they do have their farm. And so selling their farm is a great way to retire. So for a farmer that owned this land where the industrial complex was, perhaps they sold it off for this warehouse just so they can retire, and now the land use has changed over time, which, I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's just you see how the landscape changes. And we tell these stories, and they may or may not be true, but it's fun to make them up and see if they have a historical underpinning. It's kind of like historical fiction. And we use this data and we use science to figure out if it's true. So what now? I can repeat. I fill in the gaps. I explore watershed change over time through all of these historical maps from a number of different databases. So here are some statistics of the project so far from May of 2021 to the present. I cataloged 191 maps, I georectified 72 maps, digitized 556 stream segments, and I visited 2 sites in person. And throughout the process, I noticed that there were some trends of stream modification, and there's about as many different types of stream modification for as many types for the many types of land use that we have here. People can use land for a number of purposes, and as they use that land, they can modify streams for a number of purposes. So I found that people can modify streams to make way for roads. This is an example from Green Brook, where Route 22 seems to have appended the natural stream patterns of the Green Brook and its tributaries. We can have institutional stream modification related to schools or hospitals. So this Green Brook middle school now is right on top of where this Green Brook, the tributary of the Green Brook, used to stand. We can also have some industrial stream modification, like that park in Monroe. A pattern you see with that is sometimes there's like a moat around the industrial complex because there's so much pavement and so many roofs here. The water can't go into the ground, so it has to go out, and it forms this kind of moat here. And lastly, you can have something agricultural. This is kind of easy to spot from above. The present day streams seem to be almost perpendicular to the stream body, and the farms kind of sit in between here. And my hypothesis is that building a new field creates this kind of stream drainage channel when the farmer irrigates, and more water comes, and it perhaps lengthens the lengths of the stream that go kind of jut out from the main body. So I drew some very broad conclusions from what I found. First and foremost, I found that most of the maps that I skimmed through were not referenced to any coordinate system, and this is a problem because you don't know where north is. If you look at this map, it's really hard to tell where this is. But if we georeference these maps and store them in a repository, then somebody can pull them into their software and take a look at them and say, hey, this is a map and it is Somerset County and I know where it is. And this is something that somebody perhaps can do in the future. This is kind of extending the project beyond my reach, but perhaps in the future there can be a web tool that can display these maps in a coordinate reference system and put them right on there. So another thing that I found is that GIS, geographic information systems, are a powerful tool to extract watershed-wide stream data. So to that end, before, a lot of these maps aren't georeferenced, but GIS is a really powerful tool and it's very versatile. So I was able to couple this historical stream data from these maps with present-day stream data, and both of those were acquired from different disciplines. I used historical maps and hydrology. The people that modeled this data set are skilled hydrologists, and this brought these two disciplines together and created something new. And this my favorite discovery here is that developers might try to change the stream, but the landscape is the real engineer here. The shape of the landscape ultimately determines where the water is going to go. Kind of like, before you saw the Route 18 example, the water said, nope, I'm gonna go here. And in the same vein, this is the Green Brook Middle School that I mentioned earlier, and this water seems to run pretty similar to where that old stream used to go on the map. And this is one of the most striking things. I could tell that maybe a couple sports practices were canceled on that day because there's just water on the fields. And sometimes the best discovery is not finding anything. I didn't really find many natural stream changes during my analysis, but my hypothesis is that this is because the way we've developed the Lower Raritan Watershed has kind of prevented some of these stream changes from happening. And you might imagine that that this pattern right here, this meandering over time, would be a challenge for development. You can see that the darker color streams indicate more recent iterations of the same stream, and they're overlaid on top of each other. So this white stream is from 1924, and then 1939, it meandered a little bit more. 1962, it meandered a little bit more. And then by 2003, you got this really snaky stream here, and this is natural process of meandering. Now, you might imagine this is probably a challenge for development, and our go-to methods for preventing this are some pretty sophisticated and expensive engineering controls, like rock line channels and flood levees. But this kind of evolution is part of a healthy stream's life cycle. So perhaps designing cities that could coexist with natural stream changes would be an alternative and a more cost-effective approach. So I did some research into if anybody's doing this across the country, and in fact, the Vermont Agency for Natural Resources has published a couple of web pages about this, and I'll pull a quote from them. It says, "Giving room for the river by defining a freedom space for the river are cost-effective methods to promote the equilibrium processes that restore floodplains and reduce flood damages." So in English, it means, if we let these streams do this naturally and we design our landscape and our development to permit this, then perhaps the flooding and perhaps the nasty effects of extreme rain events might not be as severe. Maybe we will be a little bit more resilient. But what that requires is knowledge of where these streams are supposed to be and where these streams are. So that's the heart of the why for my work here. Is I really want to make it so that development and our idea of where streams are can help inform public policy and design. So in the future, that's going to guide me to share data and create public-facing educational materials. So that'll be like this concept design for a vegetative buffer at Lake Papiani. This is part of my senior design project for the Rutgers School of Engineering. I want to create some educational signage to go along with this buffer. The project as a whole is a bank restoration. So we're going to plant some native plants, put a goose fence here to keep the goose poop off the path, and then we're going to put some signs up, and that sign will tell some stories about the Ambrose Brook, share some of the historical maps, and show that this is in fact a man-made lake, and Ambrose Brook has been kind of has been woven in and out of industrial complexes and some other pavement installations around in this area. So I really want to daylight Ambrose Brook and how it has been throughout its whole history. So I'd like to end by sharing my favorite map that I've ever found. This is a Revolutionary War era map of a temporary bridge between Staten Island and New Jersey. And so my advisor, David, and I postulated that this barricade right here of some boats, it might not just be to keep out the British troops, but it might be in defense of pirates too. Like I said earlier, New Brunswick is a real commerce city. And this area was always, it's bustling. It's bustling commerce hub, and pirates did frequent this area. And I learned about these Revolutionary War era pirates or privateers in my high school history class, but it never really felt real to me. But seeing them on the map, seeing a possible manifestation of it, made it all the more real to me. And so my hope is that the stories I tell with the maps of the Lower Raritan Watershed has the same effect for streams, generating salience for streams that are as alive as us, despite being buried in the present day. So I want to give some special thanks to the Grant F. Walton Center for Remote Sensing and Spatial Analysis and the resources that it offered me here at Rutgers, my advisor, David Tulloch. I want to thank the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership for their guidance, especially with the Lake Papiani project and the restoration there with the educational signage. Thanks to Heather Fennick, my connection there. Thank you to Rutgers for equipping me with the resources and the tools to carry this project out, and specifically the Aresti Research Center for undergraduates. And with that, does anybody have any questions? I know
Okay.
I pontificated a little bit.
Before we just go to questions, I just want to confirm that Reagan wasn't able